Hello, and welcome back to Echoes of the Night. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're relaxing at home, winding down for the night, or just looking for a story to keep you company, you're in the right place. As always, feel free to let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying the stories. There's more to come. Tonight's story is one that takes you into a world of ordinary moments and strange happenings, where the line between comfort and unease is razor thin. So settle in, make yourself comfortable, and let's begin. It was a quiet evening in late fall, the kind of night where the air had a crisp bite to it, but not enough to be uncomfortable. The glow from the overhead lights in the small pizzeria softened the edges of the world outside. Inside, the buzz of the pizza oven was the loudest sound, accompanied by the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the corner. It was the kind of routine that felt comforting after a long day of delivering pies, and Tyler, the pizza boy, had settled into the rhythm of his shift. The pizzeria, Vincenzo's, was a family-run business that had been in the neighborhood for decades. The smell of freshly baked dough, melting cheese, and sizzling pepperoni filled the air. It wasn't a glamorous job, but Tyler had grown to appreciate the simplicity of it. There was a peacefulness in delivering pizzas to the same houses, seeing the same faces, hearing the same pleasantries. Tyler had just taken a quick break when the phone rang, its shrill tones slicing through the quiet hum of the restaurant. He picked up the receiver, his fingers instinctively brushing the greasy edge of the counter. "Vincenzo's Pizzeria, how can I help you?" he said, trying to sound as friendly as possible. Amy shook her head, setting down her pen. I thought we had sex the one time." A soft, gravelly voice answered on the other end. It was a man, but his voice answered through something distant. The words were slow, deliberate. "I'd like to place an order for delivery. Just one pizza. Large. Extra cheese." Tyler scribbled the order down on a notepad. The simplicity of it didn't raise any alarms, but there was something about the way the man spoke that caught his attention. It wasn't the request, but the tone. A slight tremor, as though the man was nervous or hiding something. "All right, sir, what's the address?" Tyler asked, waiting for the usual details. The voice hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'll be waiting for you on Hawthorne Street, the old building number 13. You'll know the one. The lights will be on." Tyler blinked. Hawthorne Street was a place that gave him the creeps. It wasn't exactly in the best part of town, and the buildings there had seen better days. He didn't know why, but something about the address felt off. "Sure, no problem," Tyler said, masking his discomfort. "I'll get that pizza out to you in about 30 minutes. Just make sure someone's there to accept the delivery." But after all, the exercise felt good to get some movement in. Then there was a long pause, the silence stretching on just a little too long. Then the man spoke again, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. "I'll be here, don't worry." Tyler felt a strange chill creep up his spine as the call ended. He stared at the receiver for a moment before hanging it up, unsure of what to make of the interaction. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was nothing more than a strange call from a regular customer. But as he began to prepare the pizza, his mind kept drifting back to the words the man had spoken. "The lights will be on." Something about that sentence seemed oddly cryptic, as if it meant more than it appeared. Willard wondered if this was how people felt when holding their loved one in the car. As Tyler placed the pizza into its box, the normal hum of the pizzeria around him felt distant, like it was happening in another world. His hands were slightly unsteady as he sealed the box, his thoughts swirling with the strange conversation. It was a simple delivery, one that he had made 100 times before, but something about it didn't sit right with him. Still, there was no reason to dwell on it. He grabbed his keys and tossed on his jacket, trying to push the unease to the back of his mind. After all, it was just another delivery. Tyler's car hummed quietly as he drove through the narrow streets of the neighborhood, the headlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. It wasn't far to Hawthorne Street, but the trip felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the growing unease gnawing at him, or the darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The night felt unusually still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. When he turned onto Hawthorne Street, the sight of the old buildings made his stomach tighten. The area had always been known for its run-down charm, but tonight there was something more unsettling about it. The buildings loomed like forgotten giants, their cracked windows and peeling paint a testament to years of neglect. The streetlights flickered sporadically, casting an eerie, stuttering glow on the scene. Tyler slowed his car as he approached number 13, the address from the call. The building stood at the end of the block, an old 3-story structure with a faded sign hanging crookedly above the entrance. The windows were dark, except for one on the second floor. A soft, yellow light shone from it, just as the man had said. The rest of the building seemed to be swallowed by shadows. He pulled his car to the curb and parked, his fingers lingering on the steering wheel. There was a heavy silence around him, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Tyler stared at the building for a long moment, feeling the weight of the strange call settling in his chest. He hadn't expected it to feel like this. This unnerving. Shaking his head, he grabbed the pizza box and stepped out of the car. The cold air hit him immediately, biting at his skin as he made his way toward the building. His footsteps echoed down the empty street, and, for a brief moment, he thought he heard something else, faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. He stopped, turning to look over his shoulder, but saw nothing. Just nerves, he thought, forcing himself to keep moving. The entrance to the building was a set of heavy double doors, one of which was slightly ajar. Tyler hesitated, staring at the gap between the doors. The light from the second-floor window flickered again, as if urging him to go inside. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. The interior was dim, the only light coming from a small bulb hanging overhead, casting long shadows across the cracked tiles of the foyer. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of dust, and something else. Something old, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. "Hello?" Tyler called out, his voice a little too loud in the stillness. He waited, but no answer came. His eyes scanned the room, and for a moment he thought he saw a shadow move across the far wall, but when he looked again, it was gone. Shaking his head, he took a few steps forward, his boots echoing on the tile floor. He could hear the faint sound of his own breathing, and it seemed too loud in the silence. He glanced up at the staircase ahead of him. The second floor. The light was still on in the window. He moved toward the stairs, the box of pizza feeling heavier in his hands with each step. The wooden stairs creaked under his weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet of the building. When he reached the top, the hallway stretched out before him, dimly lit by flickering lights. At the end of the hall was a door, slightly ajar. It was the only door that seemed to have any light behind it, the soft glow spilling out into the hallway. Tyler swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the end of the delivery. But something felt off. He knocked once, lightly, and waited. There was no response. He knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. "Hello?" Tyler called, his voice cracking slightly. The door creaked open on its own, and Tyler felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. The room was dimly lit, the same yellowish glow coming from a single lamp on a table in the center. The walls were bare, save for an old clock that ticked loudly in the corner. The room felt oddly empty, as though it was missing something vital. And then he saw him. Sitting in a chair by the window, facing away from Tyler, was the man from the phone call. He was hunched forward slightly, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, his posture stiff and unnatural. The faint light from the lamp cast strange shadows across his face, obscuring his features. "Your pizza," Tyler said, his voice shaky. He held out the box toward the man. There was no response. Tyler's pulse quickened, and for a moment he wondered if he should just leave, but something, some strange force, compelled him to step forward, to get closer. He took a tentative step toward the chair, and then the man turned his head. But it wasn't a man at all. It was something else. Tyler froze, the box slipping from his hands and crashing to the floor with a loud thud. The pizza spilled out, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the figure before him. The face was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through him. Its lips were drawn back in a twisted grin, revealing sharp, yellow teeth. And then it spoke, in a voice that wasn't the gravelly one he'd heard on the phone. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered. Tyler's heart pounded in his chest, the blood rushing in his ears. He could barely breathe as he stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock. The figure in the chair, that thing, grinned at him with its grotesque smile, its hollow eyes never leaving his. His hands shook, and he took an involuntary step back, the sound of his boots scraping against the floor loud in the oppressive silence. The pizza box lay discarded on the ground, its contents spilled and forgotten. You're not the person who called," Tyler managed to choke out, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. The creature's grin widened, if possible, and it tilted its head as though studying him. The air in the room grew colder, the hairs on the back of Tyler's neck standing up. There was something about the way it moved, or rather, didn't move, that unsettled him even more. It was as if it was more shadow than flesh, a presence that had no right to exist in the physical world. The creature's lips parted slightly, and in a voice that was soft but carried an edge of menace, it said, "You shouldn't have come." Tyler's breath hitched. He wanted to turn and run, but his feet were rooted to the floor, his body frozen in place. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing tighter, the dim light casting long, eerie shadows that danced like specters. Think, he urged himself. Get out of here. Get out now. But his mind felt clouded, his thoughts tangled in confusion. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But there it was, right in front of him. Something unnatural and wrong in every sense of the word. "What are you?" Tyler whispered, barely able to form the words. His eyes were... The creature's grin never faltered. It tilted its head again, as though savoring his fear. The seconds stretched on like hours, each moment heavier than the last. Tyler could feel his pulse racing, his legs shaking, as if they might give way at any moment. And then it spoke again. "I am the one who waits," it murmured, its voice low and rasping, like a dry wind through dead leaves. The one who has been forgotten, abandoned by those who should have remembered. Tyler's throat went dry. He wanted to speak, to ask more questions, but the words wouldn't come. The air felt thick with something he couldn't explain, something old and angry that seeped into his very bones, blowing the cobwebs away as well, wide-eyed. The creature's hollow eyes locked onto his. "Because you are the one who delivers, the one who brings the forgotten things back." The words hit Tyler like a punch to the gut. He had no idea what the creature meant, but the unease in his chest deepened. It was as though he were being pulled into something far darker than a simple late-night delivery. He could feel it now. Something in the air, something ancient and cold, watching him. "Did he? I just deliver pizza," he stammered, trying to steady his breath. I'm just doing my job." The creature's smile faded, replaced by a cold, unblinking stare. "Not all jobs are as simple as they seem." The words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken threat. Tyler swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. He had to get out. There was something horribly wrong here, and he couldn't stay. But as he took a step back, his foot hit something soft. He looked down, his breath catching in his throat. The pizza box, its contents scattered across the floor, was now perfectly arranged, the slices placed in an odd pattern, almost as if they had been set deliberately. "Oh." Before he could finish the thought, a soft scraping sound echoed from behind him, coming from the corner of the room. He turned sharply, his heart nearly stopping in his chest. A figure had appeared at the edge of the room, dark, formless, a shadow that stretched and twisted unnaturally. It was hard to make out its features, but Tyler could feel its presence. It was there, and it was moving closer, its steps slow and deliberate, as though it had all the time in the world. Tyler's pulse quickened, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He took another step back, his foot bumping against the table behind him. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like they were made of stone. He could barely move, his body trapped in a fight-or-flight response that had no outlet. And then, just as the shadowed figure drew nearer, the creature in the chair let out a low, mocking laugh. "Do you think you can leave?" it asked, its voice a harsh rasp that made Tyler's skin crawl. "There is no leaving. Not for you." And Tyler's heart hammered in his chest as he turned, his legs finally working enough to propel him toward the door. But just as he reached for the handle, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The room seemed to shake with the force of it, the walls groaning as if they were alive, as if they were closing in on him. "Trapped," the creature whispered. "You're all trapped, just like the others." Tyler's mind raced. Others? He didn't want to know. He didn't want to be a part of whatever was happening in this place. With every ounce of strength, he slammed his shoulder against the door, trying to break it open, but it wouldn't budge. The door was solid, unyielding. Finally, he flung open the door and rolled out of it. His hands slapped at it as he crept down the black hole in his mind to join his fellow exiles. The shadow in the corner had grown larger, its form now unmistakable, an entity of darkness, with long, spindly limbs that scraped against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. Tyler's eyes went wide as it began to move toward him, its presence suffocating, cold, and wrong. "I need to get out." His mind screamed for escape, but his body felt heavy, slow, as though the very air in the room was thickening, making every movement a struggle. His breath was shallow, his thoughts frantic, and just as he thought he might collapse under the weight of the terror, the creature spoke again, its voice low and final. "You're part of the order now," it said, its smile widening. "You've been marked." Tyler's heart thudded violently in his chest, each beat a painful reminder of the trap he had unknowingly walked into. His mind raced, desperately seeking an escape, but the words from the creature echoed in his ears, refusing to let him think clearly. "You've been marked." The phrase sent a cold shiver down his spine. What did that even mean? Marked? He had only delivered pizza. That was it. But the creature's eyes, those hollow, soulless pits, stared into him with an unsettling certainty, as if it knew something he didn't. The shadow in the corner continued to stretch and shift, its form growing more distinct with every passing second. Its limbs, unnaturally long and thin, scraped across the floor like nails dragging on glass. Tyler's pulse quickened as the thing inched closer, its presence suffocating, its coldness seeping into the very air he breathed. He was trapped. He had no choice but to face the reality that the door wouldn't open. No matter how hard he pushed or how desperately he screamed, it remained sealed. The walls seemed to close in on him, the room shrinking as though it were alive, constricting, suffocating him. His hands trembled as he gripped the door handle, willing it to budge, but it remained immovable. "Please," Tyler gasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Let me go. I just want to leave." The creature in the chair, the one that had been watching him all along, chuckled softly. The sound like dry leaves scraping across the ground. It leaned forward, its hollow eyes glinting with something almost like amusement. "Leave?" it repeated, the word dripping with mockery. "You think you can leave? No one leaves once they've been chosen." Tyler took a step back, his mind spinning. Chosen? What the hell was happening? "Oh, I didn't choose anything," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. I just delivered pizza, that's it." The creature tilted its head, its smile never faltering. "It doesn't matter what you think you chose. You were always going to be part of this. You've been marked, Tyler. The moment you stepped into this house, your fate was sealed." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He staggered backward, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The room felt like it was closing in on him, the walls pressing in tighter, the air thick with the scent of rot and decay. He wanted to scream, to fight, but something deep inside him told him it would be pointless. There was no escape. The shadow moved closer, its limbs twisting unnaturally, the sound of its body contorting, sending chills through Tyler's spine. He turned his back to the door and backed away, his legs unsteady, his body shaking with fear. The shadow was closer now, its elongated fingers stretching toward him, its form growing larger, more oppressive. "Well, what are you?" Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The creature's grin widened, impossibly wide, until it seemed to stretch beyond what should have been humanly possible. It leaned forward, its voice dropping to a rasping whisper. "Satant, baby. Exercise helps with morale and trains the mind. We want you to understand," it said, its words chilling. "You are not the first, and you won't be the last." "I'm scared," slowly emerging from the dark place. Tyler's blood ran cold. "Not the first?" Before he could process the words, the shadow lunged forward with unnatural speed, its spindly arms reaching out toward him. His instincts kicked in, and he stumbled backward, falling to the floor in a frantic scramble to get away. His heart hammered in his chest, his mind screaming at him to move. But it was too late. The shadow's fingers wrapped around his ankle, pulling him back toward the center of the room. Tyler's scream was swallowed by the oppressive silence, the air growing heavier, thicker, suffocating him. "Let me go," he shouted, struggling against the grip, but the shadow's hold was unyielding, cold, and relentless. "You cannot escape what is coming," the creature said, its voice a low growl. "You're already here. You're already part of it." The shadow dragged Tyler toward the chair, the dark figure looming over him, its eyes never leaving his. He could feel the coldness radiating from its touch, seeping into his very skin, chilling him to the core. "No, please!" Tyler cried, his hands scrabbling against the floor, trying to push himself free. But the more he fought, the tighter the shadow's grip became. His scream stopped being a cry and became some kind of... The creature in the chair tilted its head again, its hollow gaze locking onto Tyler with a look that seemed to pierce through him. It was as if it could see straight into his soul, as if it knew everything about him, his deepest fears, his regrets. "You don't get to choose, Tyler," it said softly. "You were never meant to choose. You were always going to be here." Oh. Tyler's breath came in ragged gasps as he was dragged closer to the chair. The world around him seemed to fade, the room spinning as his vision blurred. The creature's grin was the last thing he saw before everything went black. Tyler's body felt heavy, as though it were sinking into the cold, unforgiving ground. His head throbbed, the sharp ache making it difficult to focus. Slowly, the world around him came into view, though it was distorted, twisted in ways he couldn't quite understand. He was lying on the floor, his back pressed against something rough and unyielding. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, his body still trembling from the shock of the shadow's grip. He tried to move, but his limbs felt like lead, his muscles sore from the force that had pulled him across the room. The pain in his ankle where the creature had grabbed him pulsed with a steady, cold throb. Tyler's heart raced, the memories of the shadow and the chilling voice echoing in his mind. You were always going to be here. What did that mean? Was he dead? Was this some kind of twisted nightmare? His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment all he could see was darkness. But as his vision adjusted, he realized he was no longer in the same room. The walls were gone, replaced by a vast, empty expanse of blackness. The air was thick, oppressive, and there was a stifling stillness to everything. No sound, no movement, just an all-including silence. A chill ran down his spine as he sat up, his legs unsteady beneath him. The ground was hard, the cold seeping through his clothes, and he shivered involuntarily. He forced himself to stand, his knees weak as he steadied himself. The silence around him was suffocating, each second stretching out into eternity. Every part of him screamed to run, to escape, but he had no idea where to go. There was nothing here, no walls, no doors, no way out. Just the endless void of darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. His heart raced again, his pulse quickening as his thoughts spiraled into panic. What was this place? Where was he? And why couldn't he remember how he had gotten here? Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat as he saw a figure standing just beyond the edge of his vision. It was tall, thin, its outline blurred and shifting, like smoke or fog, but Tyler knew who it was. The creature, the one who had marked him. "You're still here," it said, its voice a low, rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Tyler's blood ran cold. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words stuck in his throat. His body was frozen, his mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Randall spoke lightly behind him, seeking assistance. Tyler paused, taking a moment. "Why?" Tyler managed to croak, his voice barely a whisper. "Why me? What do you want?" The creature tilted its head, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It seemed amused by his fear, its grin widening in an eerie display of sharp, uneven teeth. In notes, "You don't understand yet," it said softly, its voice a cruel lullaby. "But you will. You've been chosen, you've been marked, and now you belong to us." Tyler shook his head, his chest tightening with fear. Belonging to us? Who was this us, and what did it want with him? "I don't belong to anyone," Tyler said, his voice gaining strength despite the terror that gripped him. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be marked." The creature's laugh was low, a dry, rasping sound that made Tyler's skin crawl. "You think you can just walk away from this?" it said, its voice dripping with disdain. "You think you can escape the mark? It's already been made. There's no undoing it. You belong to the shadows now, Tyler. Forever." Tyler's stomach churned. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The weight of the creature's words pressed down on him, suffocating him. He wanted to run, to scream, but his legs wouldn't move. He was trapped. locked in this strange, empty void with no escape. But then something in the darkness shifted. The ground beneath his feet trembled, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Tyler's heart pounded in his chest as the creature stepped forward, its long, spindly fingers reaching out toward him. "No," Tyler whispered, taking a step back. "Please, I don't want this." The creature's eyes gleamed, its grin widening. "You don't get to choose, Tyler. The price has already been paid." Suddenly, the world around him began to change. The darkness faded, replaced by flashes of images, scenes from his life, memories he had long forgotten. He saw himself as a child, playing with his friends, laughing without a care in the world. He saw his family, his parents, his brother, his whole life flashing before him like a series of snapshots. But then the images grew darker. The laughter faded, replaced by screams and shadows. He saw himself in his apartment late at night, delivering pizzas, always just doing his job. And then he saw the moment he had walked into that house, the moment the mark had been made. The creature's voice echoed in his mind, its words seeping into his thoughts like poison. Left staring at the vacant street side, angry voices filling his mind. "You've always been a part of this, Tyler. You've always been marked." Tyler fell to his knees, the weight of the realization crushing him. There was no escape. He was part of something much bigger, something far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The creature stepped closer, its form now looming over him. Its voice was a low whisper, a dark promise. "It's time to face the consequences," he said. Tyler's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic rhythm that seemed to match the pulsing, oppressive darkness around him. He could barely catch his breath, each inhalation feeling like it might be his last. His mind raced, scrambling for any semblance of understanding. But all that filled his thoughts were fragments of confusion, fear, and the haunting certainty that there was no way out. The creature stood over him, its long skeletal fingers twitching in the air, as though savoring the terror that radiated from Tyler's very soul. Its eyes, empty, hollow voids, watched him with a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through him. Tyler could feel his body trembling, his muscles locked in place as if some invisible force had bound him to the spot. "It's not over yet," the creature whispered, its voice an unsettling mixture of pity and malice. "You think you can escape the price of your choices? The mark was only the beginning. The consequences, they're already in motion." Tyler wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but his throat constricted with fear. The words hung in the air, thick with a terrible truth he couldn't deny: the consequences. He hadn't understood what he had walked into when he accepted that last delivery. He hadn't known what price would come with that pizza. He blinked, and for a fleeting moment, the darkness around him seemed to shift. It was as if the shadows were alive, swirling and breathing, pressing in from all sides. Tyler's breath quickened as he realized that the air had grown colder, sharper. Every breath felt like ice cutting into his lungs. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the faintest sound. A soft thud, followed by a whisper. A voice, not the creature's, but a voice he recognized. "Tyler, Tyler, where are you?" The voice came from somewhere deep in the darkness, faint but unmistakable. It was Sarah's voice, his sister. She was calling for him. "Sarah?" he croaked, his voice barely audible, his throat tight with panic. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. It was as if the very ground beneath him had turned to quicksand, pulling him deeper into the blackness. The creature didn't move, didn't acknowledge the voice, but Tyler could feel its gaze intensifying. The air seemed to thicken, and a deep, guttural growl rumbled from the shadows. The ground trembled beneath him, and Tyler's eyes widened as the darkness around him seemed to pulse with an unnatural life. "Sarah?" Tyler called again, his voice desperate, his heart pounding with the realization that something was terribly wrong. Sarah's lower lip curled then, and she shook her head. Another voice answered, this one distorted and twisted, a low, mocking laugh that sent chills down his spine. "You can't save her, Tyler," the creature hissed. "She's already a part of this, just like you." Tyler's stomach dropped. What did it mean? What had happened to Sarah? Had the marks somehow spread to her as well? The thought of her trapped in this nightmare with him filled him with dread. He had to find her. He had to get out of here, no matter what. But as his eyes scanned the shadows, all he could see were the same shifting forms, the same suffocating darkness. There was no sign of Sarah, no sign of anything except the ever-present feeling of being watched. The creature leaned in closer, its cold breath brushing against his skin. "You still don't understand, do you?" it whispered. "You've already made your choice. This is the price, and it will follow you. Follow both of you, forever." Tyler felt his heart hammering in his chest, the weight of the creature's words pressing down on him like a vice. He tried to push it all away, to focus on the voice, on Sarah. He had to find her. He couldn't lose her to this. "I won't let you take her," Tyler spat, his voice hoarse but filled with defiance. He could feel the adrenaline rushing through him now, the desperation fueling him, making him fight against the suffocating fear. The creature's laugh echoed, hollow and cold, vibrating through the darkness. "You think you can defy us? You think you can change the course of fate? You are already ours, both of you." Tyler's mind raced, the weight of the creature's words settling heavily in his chest. What did it mean? Had Sarah been marked too? Was this fate, as the creature said, inevitable? Was there no way to escape? Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Something shifting in the distance, barely visible against the swirling darkness. It was a figure, small and fragile, stumbling toward him. "Sarah!" Tyler cried out, his voice breaking with a mix of hope and terror. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaking beneath him, and stumbled forward. But as he drew closer, the figure's shape became clearer, and his heart sank. It wasn't Sarah. He was him, a distorted, twisted version of himself, eyes wide and hollow, a cruel smile stretching across his face, the reflection of his own terror, of his own despair. And the creature's voice rang out behind him, soft but chilling. "You can never escape yourself, Tyler." The figure of Tyler, his doppelganger, reached out, its hand grasping at the air as if it were trying to pull him in. Tyler froze, his heart racing. The darkness closed in around him, suffocating, crushing. He had no way out. And in that moment, he realized the true price of the mark. It was not just his life, not just his soul. It was everything. It was Sarah. It was the people he loved. It was his past, his future, and his very essence. There was no escape. The darkness swallowed him whole,